Right now, on the border between Germany and Austria, a mountain is splitting in two, not eroding, not doing what mountains are supposed to do over 10,000 years of slow geological time. Splitting in real time. And the only way to hear it happening is to press a seismometer against the rock and listen for the frequency shift. In the summer of 2018, a team of researchers from GFZ Potsdam placed 7 seismometers in a ring around the summit of a 2,592-meter peak in the eastern Allgäu Alps. They were not there for an earthquake. They were there because the mountain was cracking from the inside, and they needed to hear it before it went. The peak is called Hochvogel. A fracture runs through its summit that is now 6 meters wide, 35 meters long, and 60 meters deep. A crack wider than 6 doors laid end to end, deeper than a 20-story building, pushed straight down into the rock. Since 2014, that fracture has been moving up to 10 millimeters per month without interruption. The southern side of the summit has already subsided by several meters. It has not slowed. The story you have heard is that this mountain might fall someday. That is not the whole story. Part of it already fell, and what remains above the valley is what the researchers themselves describe as a close-to-failure system. The route that runs up Hochvogel's southern face from the Austrian village of Hinterhornbach has been closed since 2014, permanently. The German Alpine Club shut the Beaumenheimer Weg, a path in use for over a century, because the rockfall risk had become impossible to manage. Hinterhornbach sits at the base of that southern wall, close enough that on a clear day from the valley floor, you can see the crack. The unstable mass above the sliding plane divides into at least 6 separate subunits, the largest a single block of 148,000 cubic meters. Total volume at risk is 260,000 cubic meters, enough to fill more than 100 Olympic swimming pools, released from 2,500 meters elevation into the valley below. Professor Michael Krautblatter of TU Munich's Chair of Landslide Research stated it plainly in a 2020 GFZ press release. The southern mass, at some point, will fail. The question the monitoring system exists to answer is what the signal looks like before failure and whether that signal arrives early enough to mean anything for the valley below. This question has not been answered, but here is what the records actually showed. In the summer of 2016, the southwestern face of Hochvogel collapsed, not through slow millimeter creep. A multi-stage cliff fall occurred, with one sector of the wall releasing in sequence over a single season. The German Alpine Club Donauwörth section photographed the aftermath, a dust cloud above the southwestern slope, the rock face visibly altered, debris scattered across the terrain below. The event was logged, it was documented. It generated almost no coverage outside the research community. The volume was between 130,000 and 150,000 cubic meters of dolomite. That collapse was already larger than half the total volume currently considered unstable at the summit. But it was not the summit block. The fracture at the top, the 6-meter gap, and the sliding plane holding 260,000 cubic meters did not move in 2016. It survived the summer, continued its displacement into autumn, into winter, and every month since. A peer-reviewed paper published in Earth Surface Dynamics in 2024, authored by Natalia Barbosa, Jorn Leinauer, and Michael Krautblatter, among others, traced what the 2016 collapse set in motion downstream. There were more than 600 individual rockfall events larger than 1 cubic meter. The Jochbach River, which drains the Hornbach Valley, received sediment pulses the researchers quantified at over 400,000 cubic meters of material, moving in cascading motion through the river system below the mountain. Relaxation times in the lower catchment were beyond 10 years. The valley is still absorbing it. A full summit failure would release into a system already operating under elevated sediment load from the last collapse. The downstream effects would include flooding, channel destabilization, and infrastructure impact, and they would compound against a baseline that the 2016 collapse already raised. The monitoring system at the summit was not designed to model that. To understand what the sensors are doing, start with what a mountain sounds like when it is about to break. Any solid object under stress vibrates at a natural frequency, a resonant pitch determined by its mass, geometry, and internal tension. When a rock mass begins to decouple, when fractures widen and rock bridges fail, that frequency changes. The change is measurable before anything visible happens at the surface. What Dr. Michael Dietz's 7-sensor network recorded across the summer of 2018 was a sawtooth. Over a repeating cycle of 5 to 7 days, the summit frequency climbed from 26 hertz to 29 hertz, then dropped back within less than 2 days. Climbed again, dropped again. The rising phase corresponded to increasing internal stress. The drop corresponded to release. But the baseline never recovered to where it started. Each cycle ended slightly lower than the one before. That asymmetry is the signal the system is built to track. But the strangest part is not the seismic signal. It is what the crack meter data revealed about the triggers, and almost nobody outside the research team has worked through what that means for timing. Jorn Leinauer's 2024 analysis identified 4 mechanisms with meaningful influence over the instability: rainfall-delivered water, snowmelt-derived water, progressive internal stress fracturing, and seismic ground acceleration. Everything else, wind, lightning, and permafrost, was ruled out. Hochvogel's summit sits below the regional permafrost elevation limit. The block is held by rock friction and residual rock bridges, not ice. The seismic amplification finding carries the sharpest edge. At Hochvogel's summit geometry, topographic amplification of peak ground velocity from regional earthquakes ranges from a factor of 2 to a factor of 11. A moderate regional earthquake, barely perceptible in the valleys below, arrives at the summit as ground motion up to 11 times more intense. If the block is already nearer its failure threshold, that amplification does not offer a warning cycle. The sawtooth assumes a gradual transition. An earthquake at the wrong moment does not. Hochvogel is not the first monitored alpine peak to move toward failure. It is the first where the watching was this thorough, and that distinction only matters if thorough watching produces a different outcome. On August 23, 2017, the northeastern flank of Piz Cengalo in the Swiss canton of Graubünden released roughly 3 million cubic meters of granite. It converted immediately into a debris flow that ran 8 kilometers into the village of Bondo. 8 hikers were never found. The debris flow buried the lower buildings to their second-floor window lintels in under 4 minutes. Displacement had been observed in the years prior. The transition from deformation to catastrophic release happened faster than the models predicted, and faster than the warning interval monitoring had been assumed to provide. Professor Krautblatter has cited Piz Cengalo explicitly as the calibration case for fast failure in monitored alpine systems. The AlpSense bench protocol at Hochvogel was built in part as a direct response to what 2017 showed about the gap between observation and action. The sensors at Hochvogel are ready. The crack meter reads in real time. The digital twin platform built by Professor Christoph Holst's group at the Technical University of Munich renders the summit in 3 dimensions, updated continuously, showing which subunit moved most, where the displacement is accelerating, and what the fracture looks like today compared to a year ago. The fracture is still opening. There is a particular kind of problem that extraordinary monitoring produces. The better the observation, the sharper the question it cannot answer. The AlpSense bench system can detect a millimeter of new displacement. It can identify the seismic fingerprint of a single internal rock bridge failing inside a mass the size of a city block. What it cannot do is compress the interval between that detection and the moment 260,000 cubic meters of dolomite reaches the valley floor. The fracture is still there, so is the question. What the seismometers are waiting to hear is the moment the sawtooth stops recovering, the moment the frequency trend turns from cyclic to terminal, and the internal emissions begin to cluster into a sequence that only ends one way. When that signal arrives, it will be captured. The sensors will detect it. The question is what happens in the valley between the detection and the debris. If this story is worth telling, subscribe. We cover more of these every week.